Okay, welcome to my basic blocking tutorial in Zbrush. We're going to go over some of the basic functions of Zbrush, and then we'll get into kind of making a mannequin, essentially unifying it under a single mesh, and then we'll probably pause there. Um, I wasn't able to figure out how to get the capture onto my tablet, so I'm just going to be using a mouse and keyboard for the whole tutorial. All right, so once you open up ZBrush, you should see something like this. You can close that. This up here is the light box. It has a lot of good tools, but we're not going to use any of them. You can either hit comma or just hit that. So when you start out, you should see something kind of like this. I have the UI slightly scaled down, but everything should be in about this place. If yours doesn't look like that, go up here to the user layouts. If you hold control, by the way, it'll explain anything in ZBrush. So just do that. And really, if you just go like left and right, it should go to eventually the default one. So I like to keep it about here. First, you'll notice once you load into ZBrush, you're actually in something called a 2.5D mode, since the original intention of ZBrush was to kind of lay things out in a 2D plane using 3D objects. But if you start just clicking everywhere, it's going to make you kind of make these default square shapes that are kind of hard to get rid of. But if you happen to have anything like this, you're in 2D5 mode or 2.5D mode, and be able to tell because you can't edit stuff. But just hit Control N, and it'll clear it all away. So everything that we're going to be working on is called a tool. It's kind of what you can think of as just a single group of meshes, like an object in ZBrush. And by default, your tool box should be over here. If for some reason it's not in this, you can see it's up here. You can grab this little arrow thing and drag it over there, and then boom. All right, so normally you can load tools, save and all that, or import an object or something like that, but we're just going to pick one of their starter tools, which is just the sphere. Now this one is already technically polymesh 3D, but we're just going to click this anyway, and it's going to make it into a polymesh 3D. Whenever you have some OBJs, it's a good idea to do that. It does some interesting stuff. You can read about it, but it's useful. Anyway, now that you have that selected, you should see this in your upper left-hand corner there. A whole slew of other things came down, but we'll deal with that later. And all you're going to do is you're just going to click and drag down, and you're going to see it actually like makes the thing on the canvas in 2D5 mode. But we'll escape that soon. If you hold Shift, it will actually like set it to an orthographic direction. So I like to do that. But then just release. You're good. You can see you're not actually interacting with it because the circle of your cursor doesn't go around it. And if you happen to click again, you're going to see you're going to make another one that intersects with it. Kind of annoying. It's neat for a different functionality, but we're not going to be using that today. So if you do this, you're going to want to make sure that you actually hit Control N, because if not and you try to edit it, you're going to be editing something on the actual canvas rather than the one you want to edit. Anyway, hit Control N and you'll get rid of that. Draw your sphere and then hit Edit or hit T. And now you'll see that we are actually in the editing area for this single object. You can hit F to center it. Now we'll go over to some of the controls for the view pane. So obviously clicking outside the object is going to make you turn and twist it, and you can see that reflected in this kind of a bust of a head that shows which direction it's looking. Obviously Z positive is going to be where it's looking forward, Z negative backwards, and then X and Y are kind of normal otherwise. Anyway, you're going to notice it's kind of zoomed in, so if you hold Alt and then click and then release Alt, it'll let you zoom. It sounds kind of weird at first, but you get used to it. So you can do that, and then if you hold Alt and right click, you'll move it around to recenter it. Whenever I'm like messing around, it slowly moves more and more right, and I have to recenter it. But yeah, again, it just takes some getting used to. Over here, you've got your brushes and materials and colors. We're not going to mess with too much of that because we're just doing blocking, but I like to change the material from the default red to one of these basic materials down here in the standard ones. Um, it's completely preference, but I don't know, it's a little easier on the eyes. Um, all right, so it shouldn't have turned like the floor on or the wireframe on or anything like that, but if so, you can check and one of these things will be lighted. You can deselect it so that it's not actually showing you wireframes or floors or anything like that. All right. Over here, you're going to see we have kind of our brush selection, and the default brush is the actual sculpting brush, and that is useful, but honestly, it's not very useful if you're only using a mouse. So I'm going to avoid using that. Same as always, to undo things, hit Control Z, and if you click up there where that brush is, um, you're going to have a whole assortment of the standard brushes you can use in Maya. We're really only going to be using the move brush, but we'll get to that later. Um, a side note to notice is that when you do make things like this, if you hold shift, you're going to see it turns blue and that this changes to a smoothing brush. It's very useful later, and you can see it just smooths everything back down. Since we're using a mouse, there's no pressure detection, so it automatically smooths as hard as it can. So we're just going to have to know that we're going to be a little destructive with our smoothing, but Control Z again. You can see up here is the history slider where you can kind of more easily see your undos and redos if you want to. Um, the rest of these have tons of purposes, but we can get to that later. Just some of the other basic tools we're going to use. So right now, this is the draw pointer thing. You use Q to get to it, and it's the default typically. But the other ones that we're honestly going to be using a lot more are the move, scale, and rotate. And for that, you can either click up here or hit W, E, or R. You're going to notice this is a very strange tool, and although it's a bit more intuitive, it's way less powerful than the other transpose tool, which you can get to by turning off Gizmo 3D, hitting Y, whatever. But this is the one I like to use. And even though it doesn't really look very friendly, once you get, I don't know, knowledgeable with it, it's pretty all right. That said, oh, one side point. When you're looking around, if you hit Shift, it will automatically lock you to looking at one of the orthographic planes. And it's really, really good for kind of getting your bearings again at how you're looking at it. And if you kind of get stuck to where even hitting Shift doesn't get you back to where you want, just hit this face and it's really easy to get back to there. There's definitely easier ways to do that, but that's the way I've been doing it. So yeah, so this is how you do some of the different tools we'll be using, and I'll explain them further as we get through. But to start out, you can see we've got our sphere. We are going to scale it down just because the default sphere size is pretty big. You can see you've got two ways to change your brush sizes when you're in the default kind of movement tool or standard tool. You can either hit space or hold space, and that'll bring up this whole menu, which is pretty useful if you're in a rush, which will give you the size of your brush. Or I just hit S, which you'll see me mess up tons of times, but I'm just comfortable with it. And this will change the overall size of your brush. The default range is 1 to 1000. You can edit that, but I'm currently just sticking with defaults because I have no reason to really change it. And most of the tutorials you'll see use the defaults. All right, so now going on to the scaling. So we are going to scale this a little bit just so that it's within the default brush range a bit better. And we're going to use the scaler tool first. So with the gizmo off, you're going to see there's 3 rings. This ring kind of affects where it's modifying from. The middle ring does one thing and the outer ring does another thing. I should probably read exactly what those rings do, but you'll just kind of mess around with it and then undo it, and you'll see that it figures itself out. Anyway, if you grab the inside circle ring thing, that will actually modify things. If you grab the outside rings, that will move the actual cursor, what it's pointing at. If you move this ring, the center one, it'll actually just kind of alternate with the other outer one, and that becomes your new center point. Not really that useful. If you move this ring, it kind of just moves the whole thing in reference to your view plane, which has its uses. And then if you move this thing, that actually changes the way it's pointing. Again, typically it can be in reference of your view plane, but not always. If you hold shift with any of these, it will actually kind of like snap it to sort of a grid type system. You'll see there's something that represents the planes, and if you click on those, it'll automatically align it with that plane. Also really useful, and you'll see me do that a lot. But to start out, you can just pick any plane, it doesn't matter. I picked X, and make sure you hit this white thing so that it centers it again on your circle. Hit X. I've stretched these out just because it's easier to see. You can hold shift and stretch it out along one of the axes, and it'll make it easier. But if you click the middle of the outer one, it'll actually just scale it in reference to wherever your center point is. Since we've centered it, it'll just actually shrink the whole circle. So if you just give it 2 good shrinks, it's hard to really know, but if you really want to get an idea, just make your brush huge and you'll see this is pretty small. I'll go 1 back. Perfect, whatever. This step isn't technically necessary, but I like it. All right, so now we have a circle that's within our brush limits and we can start actually making something out of it. So I click on the subtool thing over here. It's under the tool mesh, or under the toolbox. I don't know what to call that, but this is the actual thing we've been messing with and looking at. So to start, we are going to duplicate, and you're going to see that creates another little sphere underneath it. It's on the exact same point, so you can't see it, but we will just hit our move tool, hit the Y thing, and then hold shift, grab the middle move circle, and that'll actually just shift it up. For now, we're going to leave it basically just kind of on top of the circle. We'll get to that later. You can really do it however you want. I'm holding Alt so I can move it down a little bit because we're going to keep moving up. We're going to duplicate again. We are going to center it on that duplicate, hit Y, and then drag up again. Now we have this thing looking great. And then we're going to duplicate it 1 more time. And we will go up 1 more time. So we center it on the new thing, probably unnecessary, but I'm superstitious. And like 1 more time. So now we have 3 different things that can kind of be considered like their own mesh objects, but kind of like their own layer if you come from like a Photoshop background. And I'll switch back to Q so you can see that we have, you know, them separate. You can see now that we have multiple objects that I currently have the top one selected. It's hard to tell. It's slightly lighter, but it doesn't matter. What you will notice is that whenever I select something else, there's that kind of red dot there, and that's actually what my brush is going to modify if I click anything. And that's because I have the top sphere selected. You only really select, or you only really affect the one thing unless you do a T-pose later, but we'll get to that. Anyway, to switch between which one you're changing, hold Alt and just click on the other thing you want. And you'll see you go back and forth, and that's the quickest way. You can also click over here, but it's honestly just kind of smaller to reach. So you'll see me mostly Alt click to get to the things I want. All right, so now that we have that selected, you'll see I'll go up here to the brush. It's still in standard, but I want to click the move brush. If you don't know where it is in this list of the default brushes, just either type M or click the M up here and click move. There's also move topological. That has to do with exactly which vertices it's grabbing when it moves things, but move is fine for now. So, all right, so clearly, as I'm sure you can already tell, this is totally going to be the head and chest of a human. You knew that already, no surprise. But I'm going to make it a bit more clear, and I'm going to select the move tool, or sorry, the scale tool, and I am going to alt click this little middle one below that one. Hit the X direction just because it's the easiest with my view pane. Hold shift, click this, and kind of shrink this down a little bit, just to like there. All right. Alt hit this one. I'm going to shrink this one down a little bit. Oh wait, you can see I forgot to actually center it, so it's shrinking it in the direction of where the center is, which is neat. Not what I tried to do, but probably better, but I'm dumb, so I'm going to go back to do it the way I do. Shrunk it, picked moving. Now for moving, I'm going to center it, go to Y. This one is the one that actually moves it in a direction. If you hold shift, it'll only move in that direction. If you release shift, it'll move it wherever. But this one actually like squishes it, so to speak. And as much as that's something I'll be doing later, for now, I'm just going to move it down so it sits right on top of that little one. You know what? I'm going to squish it a little bit just so it's a little like that. Yeah, good enough. All right, then now for these ones, we don't need to mess with that too much yet. So that is clearly a head and neck. Everyone knows that. It's really good. Amazing. We will pick the bottommost circle. I'm going to duplicate it one more time. We already have that duplicate selected by default. So you will click this thing. It will center on it. I'll click the Y direction and hold shift and drag down. And that will give us kind of like a pelvis. This will all kind of mix together a bit better in a minute. Now we can start to actually use our brush a little bit. So you want to be careful when we're using a mouse. There's a lot of settings that are lost due to the loss of like pressure sensitivity and all that. So really not the perfect way to go, but for how simple we're going to be editing things, you're going to see it comes out all right. So I'm going to hit S, make my brush a bit smaller. You can hold space to do that as well. And you're going to see when moving, the brush size is everything. If I have it on the biggest brush setting and hold X, or sorry, don't do that yet, and just click over, it's going to just kind of shift the whole thing really heavily. And that's not terrible, but might not be what you're looking for. Now, what I was saying earlier, if you hit X, it's going to automatically turn on X-plane symmetry. And if you want to see that, you can go up to transform. There's a couple other tools in here, but this is where the default symmetry thing sits. We're only really going to need X at this point. Just something about, default anatomy. But you can kind of turn it a little bit, and you can see if you want to push things back with a big brush, it'll keep the general feel of the sphere without changing too much. But if you make the brush a bit smaller, like maybe about the size of the sphere, you'll see it changes it very differently. So you kind of push that in, and you'll start to get what looks like sort of a front of a chest. You push the back on a little bit, and you'll see that it kind of makes those shapes. You'll see too, there's like the slight outline of a circle. If you hit shift, you'll be able to smooth that, but realize when you're using the mouse shift, it's very destructive to the overall shape. So just be careful. It doesn't matter too much right now, but that's kind of what we're doing. We're just going to be moving things, and every time you move to a new circle, by the way, you have to hit X to activate symmetry again. Just a default property of ZBrush. So we'll move these sides in a bit, turn sideways and see that. See, I'm kind of affecting this a bit too much. There we go. You're pretty much free. You don't have to get too into the weeds on it, just because we've got basically nothing. And just a quick pass of like smoothing. We'll shrink it a little bit and then also kind of make it a bit more organic. Anyway, we will go down to the what will eventually be a pelvis. And even if you do kind of a front-facing thing and you have symmetry off, chances are it's not balanced. So just make sure anything you do without symmetry on, you undo. And that's kind of a start. You don't have to worry too much about trying to put in shoulders and collarbones yet. We've got a ways to go before anything like that happens. So just kind of make it a rough feel of what a person's body will go for. For this one, I made the top circle bigger than the smaller circle, so it's probably going to be a man. That said, this is a reasonable start. The neck looks pretty bad, so I will edit that a little bit. For the neck, because it's so small, you want a brush size that doesn't overshadow it a bit too much. Oh, fuck. As you can see, I forgot to hit X again. And then for the face, X. Drag it forward a little bit, just kind of recreate the chin area. Don't have to get too crazy just because still a long ways to go. But anything that feels good, just do it up. At this point, you're kind of just exploring the shape as much as you're defining it. So just have some fun there. If anything doesn't give you the result you want, just make the brush bigger or smaller. Yeah, good enough. All right. All right, next step. So at this point, you can kind of see the start of a torso, head, chest, belly, all that. Oh wait, I always like to do this too before I forget. Also, you want to consider that you're probably going to be making some parts for other pieces to sort of click in. So it's nice to save yourself trouble later and kind of just make those areas. You can see here I'm going to make kind of a divot for where the legs should probably go that ends up resembling hips. Here, you can kind of push this in. You can also kind of like drag if you really want to, just to make these things match up better. Anything you have that's hidden inside another mesh doesn't matter. Like that'll all get fixed later when we do Dynamesh. So just kind of do what feels right. Doesn't really matter if anything's too geometric or non organic looking because it'll all come out in the wash. All right, so shit, he's got a hell of a hump. Oops. You can see I forgot to click that, so nothing was changed. Good enough. You can see if you just want to kind of shrink things, the really destructive mouse smoothing tool does a great job. So next we have something that is reasonably recognizable as what the band tool thinks humans look like. We are just going to start with some arms then. So the typical industry pose is actually probably the A pose, not the T pose. So we are just going to add a shoulder, but rather than duplicating, because we already have, the shape of this rib cage, we're going to actually just append a new circle. So you're going to go over here to your subtool palette, click append, and a new thing will pop up, and you can just use their equivalent of primitives to add a 3D sphere. It's already going to be polymeshed and all that, so you don't have to worry about that anymore. So by default, the sphere is not selected. You have to alt click on the sphere, go to your move tool, so hit W or click move. This will bring up this whole gizmo. Make sure you center it, move it there, and then grab the little middle there and just kind of move it to where you think kind of needs to start. Center it again, pick scale, and then you'll kind of drag in the scale a bit. And you're kind of going to be creating the sort of area for both a shoulder and a like a shoulder clavicle area. That seems about right. Maybe a little bigger. Also, yeah, you can kind of morph it with the move tool here. If you grab the outer one, so it'll stretch it a little bit. It's kind of up to you the exact shape you get. So just kind of have some fun with it. That seems about right. Shoulders a little back. Oh. Shoulders a little back. Yeah, good enough. All right, so now once you've made one of the shoulders, you want to have it mirror that thing onto the opposite side. So you're just going to go out of the subtool into the geometry and then go into the modified topology. You're going to see there's a whole list of things here, but we're just going to mess with mirror and weld right now. You can see there's 3 options of how you want it to mirror it and weld it. We're just going to stick with X for now. Boom. So it's already, by clicking mirror and weld, it's added that circle to that same subtool and just put it on the opposite side of the center of the world. That dude's got his shoulders real far back and his chest far forward. We'll fix that later. For now, good enough. So next we are going to append again, another sphere. You'll see that's a kind of common theme. Click the thing. Do we want to scale it? Nah. So we'll just use move for now. I'm going to kind of make it about the width I want for the front of the arm. About the width I want for the side of the arm. You can't see it, it's hidden inside there, so boom. Make sure that you recenter it every time. Oh yeah, if you don't hold shift, it'll do some crazy morphing. So I like to hold shift in all of these different planes that I'm dabbling in. This is really not the quickest way to do it, but if you keep it simple, it's hard to mess up. That's about right. Seems good. All right, now we will just kind of move it into place. Pretty burly arm there. And next we're going to rotate. I'm going to be honest, this is the tool I'm actually worst at. But typically you can kind of set yourself up with some kind of an orthographic view and it'll just rotate it with that view. It does a good job. There's also, you can, if you're daring enough, grab this outer thing, kind of line it up with where it's currently facing so that it goes along the long edge there, and then you can also just twist it like that. Looks good. Switch back to my move tool. Yeah, alright, great. It's kind of up to you to figure out where you want it, but keeping it so that it kind of forms what is a normal shape is good. And then for this one, since it's about the same size, we're just going to do duplicate. And then it's already selected. We center it. Boom, boom. You can scale it down a little bit just because it's a forearm and mess with that later. That's good enough for now. You can kind of see the shape of the arm there. And now you can see we have these two pieces. That's close enough for me. So we are just going to do a merge between these two so we can just mirror them over all at once. And as a matter of fact, we can actually just, no, don't mirror it with the shoulders yet. We'll get to that in a minute. So do merge down when you're selected, or when you've selected the top one between the two of them, merge down. It'll tell you can't undo this. You just can't undo this easily. You can't undo it. So, okay. All right, so now you have your single arm. If you want to make any modifications here to the overall shape, you can, but we're going to do a lot of the modifications later. So now that you have a single arm, you can go into geometry, modify topology, mirror and weld. Now your arms are kind of just there. You can merge them with your shoulders if you want. I like to do that now just so I don't mess up things later. So now your arms and shoulders are all one single entity. So currently, one thing to note is I haven't been having us do any movement tool things on anything with symmetry on. If you try to do the movement tool now, it will center you between the two arms and just act like they're like a single thing, which has benefits and warnings. But if you hit X, it'll turn on symmetry, and you'll see that changes this, and it'll actually modify them both locally rather than as a single entity. So it gives you some advantages you might not otherwise have been able to do in terms of like scaling and stuff like that. So no need to get too into the weeds on that, except for the fact that the placement of this has come to bother me, so I'm just going to move them forward. Good enough. All right. So now we can press Q, go back into the movement tool just because I feel like it's the default tool and it makes me comfortable. We're going to now append on some legs. Very similar to the previous way. Doesn't really matter what you have selected. It appends it to the overall tool, so I'm clicking around, but it's completely unnecessary. We'll put another sphere on there, select the sphere, go to the move tool, make sure you recenter it there. All right. So for the leg, we're going to do about the same thing. Let's see if I can scale it like I'm supposed to. So the scaling, you can actually scale it in 2 dimension, or scale it down in 1 dimension, or extend it in 1 dimension. So if you scale it so it's longer, and then just scale the overall thing smaller, you can end up getting a pretty, not symmetrical disc, which is what I was going for. Okay. Anyway, so the move tool is definitely my favorite. It's a hell of a quad there. You see, I pretty much play it by ear. I use a lot of the orthographic views to give me an idea of what I can expect, and then I just change a lot of things there. You don't have to get too far into the details because a lot of this is still very subject to change, and having them collide a little bit isn't terrible. But you do have to be careful that when you mirror and weld in the geometry section, if there is overlap, it will create problems, but we'll get to that in a minute. All right, I'm going to rotate this a little bit, just so it's a little natural looking, I guess. Great. All right. Now, rather than immediately making a quad like I did with the shoulders, I am just going to duplicate it right now and go for the sort of area you would need for a calf. A bit thinner, a bit thinner. You can see I'm not actually leaving space for a knee because it's easy just to add that later on. Yeah, it's good enough for now. I am going to click this, check that it's above there, merge down, okay, good enough. And then while we have this thing selected, which is the whole leg, go down to geometry and mirror and weld. Sometimes it looks worse than you expect, but hey, what can you do? Next, I'm just going to fix the legs so they're a bit more natural looking in terms of their angle. So I'll center it, turn on symmetry. It's now centered on each leg. I will grab the outer middle thing so that it's kind of centered there. You can see that like either side always symmetric. And then I'll grab the middle there and just kind of rotate them together a little bit. Nice. His arms are a little short, but there'll be hands down there. It's all right. At this point, should you so elect, you can do some of these small things. Not necessary by any means, but shit. But there's some power in it. All right. That's kind of a weird spot for his elbows, but we can change that later. Speaking of later, later is now. So we are going to go up to the Z plugin, which has a bunch of really useful utilities. We're going to transpose master, and we're going to T-pose the mesh. And so what that does is it like temporarily flattens it to where you can edit all of it at once, which is great because a lot of this could use some editing. So if we were just to take our movement brush here, make it huge, and you can see I've already kind of limited my brush size because I've made some of this so big. But if I just shoot this guy to like, oh God, shoot this guy to that, and then decide, hey, that's what I'm going for, I can just go to the Z plugin, do the transfer the T-pose mesh to subtools. It'll think for a minute, and then it will systematically ruin what I had created. And I mean, if that's what I wanted, that's what I got. But yeah, that's how you do that. Either way, you could just hit Control Z and oh, right. So because I only have the arms selected, it's only doing it for the arms. So you can T-pose the mesh again, Control bug. One moment. All right, and we're back. So There was definitely a way to do that more easily than I did it, but I just selected each individual sub layer and undid all of those movements one by one. So yeah, I'll have to look up a way to actually undo a T-pose mesh faster, but that said, it's a very powerful, powerful tool. So we're going to T-pose this mesh, and we are not going to deliberately ruin it this time. We are actually going to improve it. So as you can see, he's got a hell of a waist there. We can kind of look at some of the problems with his anatomy. Going to make sure we keep it uh, symmetrical. Kind of move those up. We can sort of change the overall shape of his arms. Um, Definitely some good movements you can do here to realize the overall shape you're looking for. And again, a lot of the strength here, because you are using a mouse and keyboard, and even if you weren't, comes from the actual size of your movement brush. Because it's grabbing every subtool, or yeah, like every subtool, which is like the mesh, one by one, and altering them. So it gives you a lot of power to, and I'm just going back and forth between moving and smoothing. Gives you a lot of power to change the overall flow and sizes of your model. You can see here that there'll be some artifacts left behind if you're just using a mouse and keyboard. A lot of those artifacts will basically be lost whenever you do the remeshing, which is fine because eventually you're going to want to get in and sculpt the details to make it look realistic. Um, so not too many worries there. This whole process is pretty, at this point, should be pretty rough. That said, though, you can really you can get a lot done by doing this process well. You can, like I likely am here, get into the weeds and waste a lot of time. But that said, it's kind of fun. I kind of like it. So do whatever feels good. Um, But definitely know that with the Z meshing or the Z remesher that we're going to use soon and the Dynamesh, a lot of very small details like this will probably be lost, but there is an effect and it's good practice. But if you're actually doing something for a project and you're strapped for time, this is an area where you don't have to be very precise. But you can see just a lot of small movements can make some very realistic shapes, or more, I guess, anatomically familiar shapes arise. So just kind of going through and getting shapes that I like. Uh, you'll definitely notice just because of where I pulled some of these actual duplicated circles that there's some kind of strange, I guess, choke points. Probably could have put these closer, but in the end, if you end up with that, there's so many stages that you can fix this that it doesn't matter too much. Whatever. Hell of a waste for a dude. All right, this is a start. Um, Now there is one more functionality of the move tool. Actually, before we get into that, this is good enough for now. So even though the head is still kind of just a thing, that's something we can leave off. God, he's got a hell of a neck too. Fuck it. Um, you can work on the proportions as much as you might want here for as much as it pleases you. You're going to see I'm going to actually hit that without setting it up to ruin it, and it actually makes some shapes that are kind of distinguishable. All right. Now there is one kind of neat thing that I noticed about a lot of these. So if you go here, you have symmetry on. Let me see if I can do this right. Oh, fuck, don't do that. Some things you kind of want to terminate, if that makes sense. So I have these going up the arm. Let's see if I do this right. So the one circle you've seen me not use yet is the one inside the origin of this tool. And that one, fuck, as you can see, it basically shears it off after a point. So I made it backwards, so you'll see, move it here to the shoulder, move this to where I want to terminate it, and then on the origin click this, and then kind of just have it go out as far as I want it to, and let's say the wrists end there or something. You can see it basically just shears it off, which at times can be not what you're looking for, but for here it's kind of neat. I'm going to do the same thing with the legs. You don't even really need to have it run the full course of the thing. Dude's got some cankles, but hey, sometimes it's like that. All right, so now there we go. We have the sort of start of a very strange neck up, but the body is got some distinguishable features. Um, so if you want, we can just append some more spheres. Select the sphere, move that bad boy into position as maybe a hand. Scale it down. There's probably some way to scale this faster, but all right. You can really just kind of play with the tools to get what you're going for. As you'll notice, I basically just did a whole bunch of things and then essentially undid them, but it's like that sometimes. And that's kind of a start. Oh shit, this is still rotate, alright. And neat. So that's kind of the start of a hand shape. And then you should be careful not to get too crazy with the move tool, but I'm going to go ahead and get a little too crazy with the move tool. You can see here I don't actually have what's it called on symmetry on, and that's pretty much fine. This particular portion you can just use X to turn symmetry on and off. Um, and oh, ooh, all right. So here's where I can discuss something that I haven't discussed yet. So when you're working on something that is far away enough from the origin, it won't automatically use symmetry. That's why I kind of looked and was wondering why it didn't do that. If that's the case, there's two places you can look. Here you'll see local symmetry, and then it's also here under transform. So anyway, now I'm just using local symmetry on the hand, which has very powerful features. All right, good enough. All right. If you want to get real fancy, you can like add on a little thumb or something. Actually, why the hell did I do this? Select this, and because it's already about the same size and has an interesting shape, fuck it, just duplicate it. All right. I am just making a stupid shape, and it's totally a thumb. Yep, that's a thumb, is what you, the viewer, probably just said. Um, and you can see I'm just going through all the tools that I've mentioned earlier. Uh, and yeah, there you go. Strange thumb. All right, now with this, I'm going to go ahead and merge down with the other part of the hand. Boom. Now we got our hand. We're going to, you guessed it, go down to mirror and weld. No! Now you'll see what I did. All right. I had to turn off local symmetry before I mirror and welded. Boom. That was a test. You guys passed. I know you guys knew that was going to happen. All right. Now, last but certainly not least, I am going to attempt to make a foot after I make these cankles into ankles. Sweet. Good enough. All right. Append. So clearly, the thing that most resembles a human foot is a sphere. So you can see I have once again selected that. Now hold your horses. I know you think we're done, but there's still work to do here. I'm going to do specifically what I said not to do and get way into the weeds on making this shape almost make sense. And I'm going to do so by using this tool. And now you'll see one thing to mention here while I'm doing this is that by default, these tools do not change topology. And that's the design that we're looking for at the moment. Later on, it's going to be actually, I guess we're not looking for that now, but later on, it's going to be a bigger deal if we have our topology messed with. Right now, it doesn't matter as much, but it's just the way it is for now. Which is why if I start to really try to torque on these bad boys and get some weird shapes, you're going to see that I'm limited just because the default sphere only has so many vertices. One tool at your disposal should you feel just bothered by the rest of your model in view is you can hit this solo thing, and this will show you what I'm sure if I showed you at the beginning of this you would recognize as a human foot. Definitely. It'll let you get at that stuff, which has some usefulness, especially if before you go on to the next process you want to do some final editing. Now you'll see I've got all these ridges from all these different ways I'm pulling it. Now is a time where like I don't actually want any of these details for the most part, so I am just going to decimate the shit out of them with a nice solid smoothing. Boom. Now the problem that you'll see is this sort of pinched shape is just a leftover artifact from using nothing but spheres. And don't worry if whenever you make something you've been running into that pinched shape, because that'll be gone once we actually do our remeshing. So just let it be. That's probably good enough. I mean, you could technically use another tool to flatten this out, but for now, we'll save that for the next step. Well, the next step in the next video. All right, good enough. If you want to like flatten these down, you can just choose a real small circle and you might be all right. It's really not necessary. Neat. All right. It's probably a little short, but whatever. Um, Up here, go into geometry, make sure you have local symmetry off, and mirror and weld. So now you have what looks like a very stiff, because he has literally no back bend, um, and slightly oddly proportioned huge quads character. Um, if you wanted to go in and fix some of these things, you could just do some of the tricks I'd shown before. Um, Stuff like that. Uh, it is an avenue open to those who, oh God, that I really should do some of that. But yeah, I can't just give him no butt. That'd be a hell of an existence there. Boom. There you go. All right. Now, the next step that I usually take is I'm just going to go and I'm just going to merge all of these down. You might want to, before you do something quite like that, because you might want to come back to this later, just go ahead and if you want to save any of this, I probably should have explained this earlier. You're going to see that there's something called file up here. That saves the whole project. It's unnecessary and it's like really heavy. Just save it as a tool. Um, Oh, wait, yeah. So this will save the whole tool. You can see because I have this selected, that's what it's saving. It's made these other copies. Don't worry about those. You don't need those. Just save it to, I don't know, wherever. Uh, and then you can just save it as a Z tool. So I'll just save it to my desktop. There we go. You can see, let's say I had to close it or something. You can initialize ZBrush and basically close and reopen simultaneously. Reopen. All you have to do is just go to Load Tool, go to wherever it is you put your extremely normal sculpt, and then here you're going to see, boom, you do just what you did with the sphere before. Go to Edit. You can change your materials, and you're right back where you were. Now, lastly, to get this kind of all to look like what we should start with next time, we're going to take all these and merge them down. It's going to tell you that you lose some stuff. Just hit always OK to save time. Boom, 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 boom. Now this is all one tool. So that said, it's technically not, it's technically separate surfaces, if that makes sense. So let me see if I can show that. Yeah, so you see how there's like different surfaces here based on what I've selected. There's actually creative ways that if you are in the know, you can just mask off, which I haven't talked about masking, but you can just select some of these pieces. And if you were so compelled, you could just pull them. Oh shit, I'm in the standard brush. Um, you could just pull them apart once you select your move brush, and they're still separate. We're going to fix that now though. Alright, for masking I haven't gone over, but it's basically the selection tool. If you end up holding control accidentally, just drag off the side and you will stop selecting things. But it's all meshed together. The first thing we're going to do after that, go to geometry, and then we're going to go to Dynamesh. So Dynamesh is a tool inside inside ZBrush that will rethink your topology for you as you sculpt. The other tool is called Sculptress Pro. That's a whole separate thing. They both have their advantages. For now, we're just going to use Dynamesh. So you click it on, boom. It has already melded everything into a single mesh. Now, there's stuff you can do. Normally, if I actually had like a tablet, I would softly just kind of smooth some of these out. And you can still get away with some of that with a mouse. Just know that you're losing some details here and there. And the bigger your brush, whenever you smooth, the more it's going to like make your mesh kind of skinny, if that makes sense. Um, but anyway, you can kind of see how it's affecting certain things. So if you want to mess with any of this stuff, it can honestly be pretty cool because it can be kind of nice, but you don't want to lose too many details or else what was the point of all that blocking? But one thing I'm still not entirely sure about is why it's recognizing these two things as different surfaces, because as you can see it still wants to call them separate things. There's a way to overcome that. Um, the way to overcome that is the fact that I didn't actually merge them.
He's going over that cliff.
A note, make sure you start at the top one when you merge them. Anyway, now we're going to merge them down. So now they're all together. We are going to Dynamesh them like I mentioned before. Now you can see everything is adjoined. And if you want to just kind of mesh those seams with a little smoothing, that is up to you. It's a good idea, but I'm going to tell you that you're going to be pretty destructive with a mouse and keyboard. You really want to be using a some kind of a stylus or tablet or something. But assuming you've got this sculpted to your liking, or not sculpted, set up to your liking, we are going to go to the next step and we are going to remesh it. So what that'll do is that'll look over your overall current topology as it stands, and it'll kind of decimate and recreate edges in a way that represents what you're trying to show a bit better. And it does a good job usually. So I clicked it, it's thinking, and then boom, you should see that it's kind of the start of what can be considered a base mesh. And that said, because um, I didn't smooth out some of these edges. It has some real hard edges in there, and there's some spots where the edge flow kind of bunches up, but it's a start. And even if you start with this, um, you could honestly do one of two things, but we'll go from there and that on the next one once you reach this. But yeah, so that's the start. Thanks for watching. Hope it was helpful, and I'll